I'm Stephanie Romiszewski and I am a sleep physiologist. Insomnia is a sleep disorder that can be categorized by either struggling to fall asleep or struggling to stay asleep in the middle of the night, or a bit of both. This is even when you have a good environment to sleep in and the opportunity to sleep, and the sleep just doesn't come. Of course, we can all suffer from this from time to time, and that's completely normal. But when it becomes more consistent, you start to notice that it affects your daytime. And when this happens, it can become quite worrying. A lot of us get quite anxious about it. Once it's happening for at least 3 nights a week for 3 months or longer, we would call that chronic insomnia. And this kind of insomnia affects up to 10% of the global population. It's true that women and older people do suffer more with insomnia because of the physiological changes that they go through. But in reality, I see lots of different types of people in my insomnia clinics, and insomnia just doesn't discriminate. Insomnia as a term was first described in the 1800s, and the definition hasn't really changed since then. So the perception that you have a problem with the quality or the duration of your sleep. But did cavemen suffer from insomnia? Well, probably not, because they didn't have as many of the interruptions as we have today, like artificial light at the wrong times and stresses and anxieties that are not tigers, for example. So insomnia can be triggered by many different factors: hormones, life stress, environmental changes, jet lag, time shifts. There are so many different things: medication, illness, you name it, it can disrupt your sleep. And actually, it's completely normal for this to happen. And whilst it's happening, your sleep might look a bit different, and it might have to take some time to adapt or realign itself to the new normal. But when this doesn't happen and it becomes more consistent and more chronic, usually there are other perpetuating factors at play which are not the original triggers, because even if you took the original triggers away, like the stress, like the illness or the medication, the insomnia pattern tends to remain. Why is this? Well, there are a few factors here. One of them is hypersensitivity. When something triggers you to wake up in the night, and it does this over and over again, it starts to break down your sleep. Now, if it's breaking down your sleep becomes weaker. And when your sleep becomes weaker, you become more sensitive to your environment. So that trigger becomes even more sensitive to you. That's why sometimes if you're looking at someone in the bed next to you thinking, how are you not waking up to this noise? It's because their sleep is much stronger than yours at the time. Another perpetuating factor is the idea that we're not very well educated in sleep. And what that means is our sort of logical understanding of what we might want to do to help sleep, these behaviours actually end up making it worse. So some of the behaviours that we put in place start to make the problem worse, like spending more time in bed. And lastly, there is something called sleep anxiety, which is quite specific. It's about fearing what will happen when you go to bed or what will happen if you don't get the right amount of sleep. And again, this does come down to our lack of education around how sleep works. But as you can imagine, it's a perpetuating factor. So the more anxious you get before you go to bed, the more that lovely physiological process of you winding down gets disrupted, and you are unlikely to fall asleep or to maintain it later on in the night. I guess that's how a textbook might describe what insomnia is, but what is it really like for the sufferer, so somebody going through insomnia? Imagine going to bed fearing what will happen every time you start getting ready for bed, or in the middle of the night being so wide but tired that you can't sleep and start worrying about what's going to happen the next day. You try absolutely everything. So you go to the doctors, you look online, you find something called sleep hygiene, which is this list of things that you can do to get a good night's sleep. You might try pills and potions and all sorts of different things that people tell us that are going to help hack your sleep or make your sleep better, but they don't work. People around you, friends and family, might say to you, I don't know what's wrong with you, I just hit the pillow and I'm gone, and you start to feel very misunderstood. It makes you feel very isolated and lonely, and it starts to make you feel like the 1% who can't be treated. That constant fatigue that it brings you, that wide but tired brain exactly when you don't want it, it starts to move you away from the life that you once led. You start cancelling things and trying to adapt yourself and cope any way you can so that you can get through that day and hopefully get some sleep tomorrow, except it doesn't work.
How do we treat insomnia? So